I try to think back to like first principles, meaning like, you know, I think whenever you're evaluating a new technique or you're evaluating a new training method or you're just generally evaluating like how someone moves, like there should always be like a scientific thought process to it.
Welcome back to Science and Sports, my podcast all about sports science, performance, health, and nutrition. Today I'm joined by Dr. Matthew Casturo. Hi, Matthew.
Yeah, hi. Glad to be here.
Thank you so much for joining me today. We talked a little bit a couple of minutes ago of the difference in time, so I'm very, very happy that you have time for me and to talk to me a little bit on my podcast today. How are you doing?
Doing good. Yeah. Just glad to be here, and I appreciate you making the time as well.
For sure. I want to talk to you, so I'll stay up late and find some time to talk to you, obviously.
Thank you.
Before we start the episode and talk a little bit about all the different things that you learned and you teach in America and maybe some differences and understandings in here in Germany where I live, can you give me a brief introduction about yourself?
Sure. Yeah, and I'm curious how this does work elsewhere as well. I've spoken to a few physios and coaches from different areas around the world, but I'll give you an overview of how it worked for at least for me in the United States. And that was I started college actually with a different idea of what to do. I was going to be a physics engineer, and
Okay.
that was initially why I chose to go to Ohio State. But I quickly learned that I enjoyed spending more time at the gym, training and playing basketball, and just spending time with people and sports more so than computers. So I quickly switched to exercise science, and then got that degree. And at the time, I kind of still had some questions. I started coaching. I was a high school strength conditioning coach for a year, and started a personal training business. But then I still had a lot of questions to answer about like movement and things that I was seeing that I didn't understand all the way. So I chose to go back to physical therapy school, and at least in the United States now, that's typically a 3-year doctoral program, a clinical doctorate in physical therapy. And I did that 3-year program also at Ohio State, and then started to get out there and work. And actually, throughout the time of my physical therapy school, I started making videos, and I was training like a lot of clients before and after class. And it opened some opportunities to make YouTube videos and eventually start what is now the movement system. So that's kind of my story in history.
Well, that's awesome. You mentioned at the beginning how it's here in Germany, for example. For me, when I started also my podcast before that, I was playing professional ice hockey for 6 or 7 years, and
Mhm.
parallel to that, I did my bachelor's. I was a junior coach. I retired, got my master's degree in sports science, and then got the opportunity to work in the place I'm now
Mhm.
in the beautiful Weiden in the Oberpfalz. And I've been here for 4 years, also part of the under 17 national team. And that's also a question I wanted to ask you. What's your standpoint on that? Because I asked it many times in my podcast history. But do you
Mhm.
think a good strength and conditioning coach or a good sports scientist or physical therapist, for example, does he need to play the sport he works in before? Does it
Mhm.
make him a better coach, or do you think you can coach at the same level as someone who didn't play?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I'll say this probably does work differently in the United States than other areas, because at least it's my understanding that in the USA, like a high school is usually like 4 grades. Like you're there like 14 to 18 years old, and
Hmm.
oftentimes there's maybe one strength and conditioning coach for all the high school teams, or maybe two or three if you have a bigger school. Um, but I think in other countries, is it maybe like clubs? Like you don't play for your school. Is that true in Germany?
So we don't really have we have partnerships with schools
Hmm.
as a big club, but
Hmm.
the way it works in US or Canada that you have it integrated into the school, we I don't know if we actually have it here. It's more like you spend time after school to go to practice, like
Hmm.
two completely separate things. But in some cases, there are corporations, so you can leave school early for practice, or they give you some days off for tournaments or whatsoever. But
Hmm.
after you're done with school, you basically play ice hockey or sports in general at next to it. Obviously,
Hmm.
summer sports like track and field you can do in school, but it's it's hard. Maybe if you go
Hmm.
to like really like a camp where you have school and sports combined, but it's just for like the really high end athletes of the country.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think we have some of that as well. Like sometimes uh especially if you play one, if you specialize in one sport as you get, later in your playing career, you'll play for your high school in one season and you'll play
Hmm.
for a club in another season. But anyway, I think there's a lot of different opportunities for strength and conditioning coaches as well as physical therapists to work with a range of athletes. And I would say, whether it be the private setting, whether that be at a college, whether that be at a high school level, um, in most cases, like strength and conditioning coaches are working with at least two or three different teams. So
Hmm.
it's not realistic to have expertise, like have high level playing experience with every
Yeah.
athlete that you coach, especially if you're coaching rowers and cross country runners and soccer and lacrosse and field hockey. It's like, you have to be familiar with each sport and you have to listen to your athletes and learn. But I don't think you have to have significant playing experience, with every, athlete that you coach.
That's interesting that you're mentioning that, because I had the chance to talk to two strength coaches from the US, and one of them had a ice hockey team, field hockey team, and I think swimmers, and the other one was
Hmm.
softball and this and that. And for me as a German, it was like, wow, it's obviously similarities, but also like complete opposites. And here it's just like, hey, okay, you work. In my case, I work senior hockey, one club only. Sometimes I'll obviously help out in for the youth teams, but it's
Hmm.
always just hockey. If I want to get into soccer, then I have to change to a different club who might not take me because I have no playing experience. They rather take someone
Hmm.
who actually played it. Doesn't even have to be the highest level, but you're still active. And I think for me, it helps that I played ice hockey, because I know how, in which situations the players get fatigued or not, how they have to move.
Yeah.
If they get injured, I might could see what's going on. Maybe not
Hmm.
all the time, but you have a different feeling. But yeah, the other thing I wanted to ask you, when you are working in college or university or even adults in the United States, you need to have a specific certification, right?
Well, actually, that is a little bit. There's not one governing body for strength and conditioning. I
Okay.
think the most popular certification with strength and conditioning is the NSCA, the National
Hmm.
Strength and Conditioning Association's CSCS certification. That's probably what for working with athletes is most common. But I will say, like, especially in the private setting, you'll see coaches with some that have a master's degree and in strength and conditioning and multiple certifications, but you'll also see some coaches that get through the door without a background. Maybe they transitioned from another career and started in strength and conditioning, and because the private setting is a little bit more um, like your ability to communicate and like sales, like being able to uh I guess like run a business is a big
Hmm.
part of it. It's not as rigorous with the certification demand as maybe a college strength and conditioning coach or a pro team. They often have a master's degree requirement and certain certification requirements.
Yeah.
So it's good and bad. It gives the opportunity for some people who find this industry later to pivot to it without having to go through 4 or 6 years of education, but it does make it a little bit inconsistent with the delivery and the knowledge that you're going to get as an athlete from a coach.
Yeah. because here in Germany you don't really need to have something. You could
Hmm.
be doing a bachelor's degree and work in the strength and conditioning field. A master's degree you can do it probably without, if you know what you're talking about, or if you could sell yourself good enough. And
Yeah.
I recently had a talk with the German director of the NSCA for the German branch,
Hmm.
because it's something where you can really show that you know what you're talking about, that you can teach it. I mean, obviously, you know how it is. It's just a certificate, this or that, but you still
Hmm.
learn a lot, and you can even evolve into a better coach. So that's why I was asking this question.
Yeah.
But to talk more about you, and obviously about the movement system, you said you have a YouTube channel. You also have a big podcast.
Hmm.
What was your, like, what do you actually mean by the movement system? Could you a little
Uh,
elaborate on that?
yeah. Yeah. I've started this like years and years ago now, and I think it's just the way that I think is in systems. I think some people think more like kind of sequentially, or they learn in kind of a different way. But I'm always like, whenever I'm learning a new topic, I'm trying to like understand how it fits into what I already know, how it fits into the bigger system. And yeah, I just landed on the name the movement system because I think it does a good job of encompassing, I guess, like the way that I think about movement.
Hmm. Do you because I was thinking about movement system. Is it because you move in sports or in general, or is it about like including new topics to the one like you just mentioned, to the to your drawer of knowledge you already have, and to,
Hmm.
okay, how can I incorporate this information into my existing information? Is it actually a good information? Because nowadays you see videos of everything on YouTube or on Instagram, and then
Hmm.
you're at the point, okay, is it actually good if I do it with the players or not?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I will say too, like I try to think back to like first principles, meaning like, you know, I think whenever you're evaluating a new technique, or you're evaluating a new training method, or you're just generally evaluating like how someone, even how someone moves, like there should always be like a scientific thought process to it. So, for example, um, I don't like the strategy that a lot of coaches take to movement assessment, where they do a functional movement screen and they
Hmm.
see an athlete lunge and overhead squat and reach behind their back, and they see a whole series of movements, and they say, okay, well, based on all the errors that I saw, these are the 10 corrective exercises that you need to do. And I kind of understand the approach, because it's like, okay, well, there's limited range of motion here, so I'm going to give them 2 exercises for that. Limited range of motion here, 2 exercises for that. And you end up with this big list of like corrective exercises. But to me, the the system that you're using is flawed, because it's not in line with the scientific method. You're manipulating 10 variables whenever you give 10 exercises, and then you're measuring, potentially 10 different, outputs. Like you're going
Hmm.
to have to remeasure, 10 different movements, and each of these movements has, because it's functional, it's there's different, range of motion involved. There's shoulder flexion, internal rotation, external rotation, all in one movement. You don't really know necessarily where the root of that limitation that you're seeing is coming from. So I tend to take a more scientific approach to movement assessment, in that I'll measure one thing, try one intervention, and then remeasure. And
Hmm.
it's maybe a slower process sometimes, because I'm not trying to fix everything at once. But I think over time it does make more sense to me as a coach, and it helps the athlete understand cause and effect. Like I did this, and then I could feel my shoulder moving better, or it didn't move better. Then we need to try something else. But I always go back to that first principles, that scientific method of, let's do a test, let's do one intervention, let's retest, and then measure the output, like the change that we get.
Hmm.
And I
Are
think
you
you can think
talking?
about that in a lot of ways.
Sorry, didn't want to interrupt you.
Okay.
Do you Are you talking about one-on-one setting?
Yeah, that's like if you're doing a movement assessment one on one. I
Okay.
do think it's difficult with teams, and I've ran functional movement screens with large teams before. It's not that I'm completely against the system. I just think it leads to a lot of kind of watered down results or unclear um, results because again you're changing too many variables at once. Um, but each coach can take their own approach. I think just like always coming back to first principles and making sure you have a system to to test whether your interventions are working. And this is the same with program design. You could try anything, but you just want to make sure that you have some system to test and retest and ensure that there's a change.
How do you, because I'm working in a team setting, how do you, or how would you handle just the same situation as you explained it with the
Mm-hmm.
function movement screen, for example? How do you handle that if a coach, for example, is like the head coach, wants immediate results, and then he
Mm-hmm.
thinks with his normal coach logic, you need to do this and this and this and this and that, and but you're thinking, okay, I'll focus on one point, try to make him better, do an intervention,
Mm-hmm.
see how it develops. How is it possible to really work together? Because some coaches, they're, for example, with my team here, they really give me the freedom to work, and I can not do what I want, but they let me do my work. But there
Mm-hmm.
are instances where the coach is always here and there and has better ideas, for example. So how can you, maybe you had the experience, works on the same page? So because at the end of the day, the athlete needs to be healthy, the athlete needs to get better, and you both, or every party, should work towards that and not bring their own ego or their own I know it better kind of thing into
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, and I'll say everyone approaches this differently. I want to take this two different directions. First, we'll talk about movement assessment, and then we'll talk
Hmm.
about the way you write programs, because I think you
Hmm.
could think about this with both. So, in terms of a movement assessment, one way to do this is to just determine what's important for your sport, and maybe I'm just going to come up with one like maybe thoracic rotation is important for your sport. You're working with hockey players; they need to be able to rotate. They need to
Yeah.
be able to, it's just an important quality. We can just give every athlete thoracic rotation exercises, and I think that's pretty good. Like you could do that approach, and just incorporate thoracic rotation into your warm up, and that can serve your athletes pretty well, I think. Now, what and you could take that same approach with a soccer player working with some ankle stability, or with a basketball player who needs some isometrics for their knee tendons, because it's like tendinopathy is kind of common in that sport.
Hmm.
And you can do that approach. I think if you want to get a little bit more specific, you could do a movement screen just the way that I would do it. And of course, I come from a lens of having a physical therapy background. So maybe I'm a little bit more comfortable with this method of assessment, but I would just screen more specifically. So instead of screening, for example, an overhead squat, which it's a lot of things at once, and it's
Hmm.
kind of hard to determine where the movement limitation is, I would just screen ankle dorsiflexion, screen knee flexion, screen hip rotation, screen shoulder flexion. And then if you see an athlete that has a specific limitation, one athlete is going to be shoulder flexion. You're going to give them a shoulder flexion specific movement
Hmm.
to incorporate into their kind of specific warm up. And the other athlete who has a hip rotation deficit, you give them a specific intervention for that. It's just some of that I think you miss whenever you look at big movements, and whenever you can actually go in and look and see an athlete has 150 degrees of shoulder flexion because you put their back against the wall and you said touch your thumb to the wall and they weren't even close. It's like um, that's where you want to give a specific intervention. So
Yeah.
that's the movement assessment side. And then on the program side, I think you can think about this similarly. If we want to give athletes a program for improving their strength, and we're working with relatively high loads, we've tested their 1 rep max, we can assign repetitions at 85% of 1 rep max, let's just say.
Hmm.
Now, the thing is, on average, your athletes may get 6 repetitions, but in reality, some athletes may only get 4 or 5. Some athletes may be able to do 8 or 10 because maybe they're um, there's some research on this. It's not actually clear whether it's like more they're endurance based or more like capillary density or more like why some athletes are able to get so many more. But it's just true that we know that we can program to the average, but there's going to be athletes on either side of that. There's a couple different ways you can solve for that. You could just program to the average and then let some athletes progress faster than others. Some athletes are going to struggle through, other athletes are going to be adding weight quickly. But if we can get a little bit more specific with our interventions, uh, we could use something like RIR, like repetitions in reserve. And instead of programming, 6 reps or 5 reps, we could program 1 repetition in reserve and teach these athletes to kind of auto regulate to go until they have just 1 rep left in the tank if we're
Mm-hmm.
trying to improve that quality of strength. And then I think like even one level deeper or like one level more specificity to this would be incorporating something like velocity based training, where
Mm-hmm.
now, we have each athlete lift the bar as fast as they can while measuring bar speed. And then we cut the set off when they lose 20% bar speed. Now, that's a way that every athlete has the same stimulus and the same fatigue. Because if we just program 6 reps, some athletes will go until failure. They'll lose a ton of speed and they're just going to be kind of burned out for the next few days from that training session. But other athletes that could have done 8 or 9 and only did, 5 reps or whatever you assigned, they didn't have that much of a stimulus.
Mm-hmm.
So as you can see, there's kind of different levels of scientific specificity to your program design, and you kind of have to decide what you have access to, what's feasible for your group. But knowing first principles, my goal is to give a consistent stressor to my athletes. I don't want to give one athlete a lot of stress and one athlete not very much. How do I accomplish that? And just kind of thinking through like the different methods for getting more specific to that outcome.
Mm-hmm. It's funny that you mentioned velocity-based training,
Mm-hmm.
because each one of my guests who is coming from the US or Canada talks about that topic. And
Okay.
I feel like I never heard someone here in Germany talk about them using it here.
Mm-hmm.
Well, is it like a not gold standard, but I feel like from the conversations I had, velocity-based training is like basically part in every college and every university for the whole team.
Yeah.
Because I don't really know how to measure that without any systems. Obviously, they're expensive for sure, but
Mm-hmm.
in my example, our gym is pretty small. We can fit 2 racks in it, a couple of bikes, and
Mm-hmm.
it's hard for a whole team. We have a corporation, but um, if we talk about our gym, I could fit 2 things inside there, and
Mm-hmm.
it's hard to use it for all of our team. Do you think there is any kind of way to measure it without having those systems in place?
Yeah, I'll say 2 things. Like I think that using the repetitions in reserve method and doing so thoughtfully can get you to a similar response, because again, both athletes now are going till there's 1 rep left in the tank or till there's 2 reps left in the tank. It's a little bit
Mm-hmm.
more subjective because it's the athlete's perception of what they could do. So it's not quite as objective as measuring velocity. But I think like knowing the principle and implementing that type of system can get you great results as well. So to say like I would definitely not say you need velocity based training. I think it's just like a technique that the coaches who have access to it can utilize, and it's just one way to be more objective. Now, the other thing I'll say is I think it's going to be very accessible in the near future whenever basically an app can do it. Like an app can look
Yeah.
at the like you could just put a phone and record an athlete and it would
Mm-hmm.
just tell you how fast the bar is moving. I don't think we're that far away from doing, having that type of access and having it be relatively accurate.
Mm-hmm.
But up until now, it's taken devices. And actually, whenever I got into this with my first strength conditioning internship, which was almost 10 years ago, it was like a really expensive device, like probably over $1,000 US. And then in the last maybe 5 years ago, it was probably brought down to half of that. And again, in the
Hmm.
last 2 or 3 years, it's down to half of that again, with devices right around like $200 US now, which does make it more accessible. I think that's maybe why we're hearing about it more. And there's also more research kind of coming out
Yeah.
about it. But yeah, I think it'll spread over time. And again, just knowing the principles, even if you don't have the device, I still think provides value.
Yeah. Do you think there is a, because we're talking about little things in the future here and there, back in the
Mhm.
days, like 20 years ago, there wasn't even some science-based tools, or 30 years ago, whatever,
Yeah.
and you just worked out until you puked kind of workout. Do you think there nowadays, or even in the future, you still have to have some of those days in team sports, for example, or that you,
Mhm.
I mean, I'm thinking about, do you really need to work on or work with science every day for every lift? Or is it
Mhm.
also sometimes important that you put it a little to the side and just do a hard work so the players or your athlete or someone who you're working with gets to that stage of, wow, I didn't even know that my body can achieve that, or to really go to your limits or beyond the limits to test it out?
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's time for that. Like, uh, if you think about at least the way maybe American football trains in the USA, there's a lot of that still, that like grit and almost like training for the mental aspect more than the physical, knowing that you know the there's US football teams that'll just, you put a weight plate down and you'll run 100 yards or 100 meters, like kind of down and back on the field until
Hmm.
you're very fatigued. And we think maybe physiologically, is that similar to sprinting for 4 seconds in a football game? Not really, but it does develop the mental aspect. And whenever they're doing this is usually far from competition, months before the first game. So the fatigue from doing that, if it lasts a few days, it's not going to impact uh, their results. I think where you make mistakes is whenever you're doing it uh, the wrong way. Like if that's done very early off season, actually that can be dangerous. And you've probably heard of like some instances of cardiac arrest or overtraining. And then the highest likelihood of that is after a period of no training. So like seeing a sharp increase in training volume
Hmm.
paired with a hot environment. So this is the athletes who are most vulnerable are those who are training in the summertime and coming off of a period of no training and jumping into too much training at once. So I think those are the times where we have to pull back and be careful that we're not adding too much. But if you're relatively accommodated, like you've been practicing for 4 or 5 days per week for a month or so now, we're not close to the season. I think there's going to be a time for days where you just push really hard.
Yeah, that's another interesting thing you just mentioned, because it kind of reflects to my athletes here in the summer months. Because if we have our off season, they're spread all over Germany, some are from US or Canada, Czech Republic.
Hmm.
Do you think there is a need to adapt their training schedules or their training plans, let's say, to the location they're from? Like you just said,
Mm.
hot summer months, let's say, they're always working out in the summer, maybe summer in a colder region. Do you think you could adjust it a bit by that?
Yeah, and I was I lived in Las Vegas, Nevada for 2 years,
Hmm.
and we had some NFL professional football players, like American football players, who were training in the Las Vegas heat, and some of them even it overlapped with Ramadan, so they can't drink water
Hmm.
or eat throughout the whole day. And a lot of these players just have such mental toughness to be able to keep training even in difficult conditions like that. Now, that's at the highest level. They're going to keep training no matter what, to some extent. and some athletes are maybe not as dedicated and will pull back
Mhm.
from training for far, less excuse. Um, it's hard to say overall because every athlete is so different. Their goals are different. Uh, but I think you should accommodate to the conditions. You should listen to your athlete and look at what they can handle, what they what they want to do. Sometimes you're just going to have really ambitious athletes who, you know, and the one athlete I'm talking about in particular, he was kind of a player where he got a few minutes. He wasn't, particularly good, but he every year has risen and risen just from
Mhm.
mental toughness and discipline and training year round. I've seen that, and I've seen the opposite. I've seen very highly skilled players who just will not put in the work in their off-season time period, and each year it seems like they're kind of below expectations, and they lose opportunities. So
Yeah.
I don't know. Long story short, I've been in this long enough to see both. Um, as a coach, you're always trying to meet your athletes where they're at, give them what they need, adapt. Um, yeah, it's just it's tough because yeah, every athlete's so different.
Yeah. Do you think it's useful? Yeah, obviously it is, but
Uh-huh.
to how much should you adapt to the player, what he wants to
Mhm.
do, what's his favorite drills, for example? Do you think it's you should force them to do your drills, or is it also
Mm.
good to listen to them, to obviously take in consideration if they had previous injuries or not, if they can
Yeah.
do certain lifts, or is it like a okay give and take? You could just find
Yeah.
a midway point, or do you think it's necessary for a strength coach? Maybe someone's listening to
Mhm.
put put the player into his programming, and
Yeah.
no matter what, he has to follow it.
Well, I think especially the higher level the athlete is, the more experience they have training and the more training time they have, they they begin to learn their body very well. Like they know what their body is telling them. Um, so I think we as coaches have to respect that. But oftentimes the athlete doesn't know what you know. So if
Mm.
it's an athlete with like, knee tendon pain and we're going through like a rehab phase in the off season where they have to go slow and heavy and control stuff, they don't know necessarily that jumping can flare them up or going really deep with their knee bending can flare them up. Maybe they were okay with that. 6 months ago, they were doing a lot of it, but that's kind of what got them into, the situation they're in now. So you kind of have to
Mhm.
sometimes put guardrails on and say, okay, I want your pain level to stay between 3 or 4 out of 10, and I want to make sure it returns after 24 hours. If it does go higher, I want to make sure it's back to, 2 out of 10, 24 hours later. And here's the things that we're prioritizing. Here's what we're trying to avoid for this amount of time. And that's kind of more of a rehab situation, I guess. And
Mhm.
maybe we could now go into a strength and conditioning situation. But let's just imagine like an athlete kind of knows what works well for them in terms of conditioning. Like, uh, imagine like a player who's been playing several seasons now, and they've had the opportunity to get in shape for their season many times. They probably know how their own like nervous system, their own body responds to different methods of conditioning, and they kind of probably already know some amount of what they need to do.
Mhm.
So you kind of do have to meet them with where they're at, but ideally you are introducing like a scientific process to this and saying, okay, our test is going to be the 300-yard shuttle run, or our test is going to be a 1.5 mile run, or a 5K time trial, or whatever, and we want to improve this. So let's work together here to figure out your weekly schedule, the training methods that you like the best, the ones that I think are critical to put in your week, and let's work out like when you're going to do what,
Yeah.
because maybe they want to do, you know, certain training sessions. It's kind of on you to work together to figure out how that's going to work and make sure that it's going to improve their testing and ultimately their performance.
Because yeah, I'm totally with you because when I started or when I retired and started doing sports science and strength and conditioning, obviously
Hmm.
in the off season I programmed like hell and wanted to show myself to the players and show them my program. And then when we started, it was okay. I mean, I thought it was good at the time, but I didn't really not notice, but I didn't really think about the fact that I work with, I'm talking senior level. So I didn't even notice that I have a couple of 18-year-olds, 20-year-olds, but I also had 38-year-olds at that time. So I tried to like, yeah, you all do the same. Doesn't matter what position, doesn't matter your age.
Yeah.
And then I realized like, okay, maybe I should think about that as well, because a 40-year-old, he has to maintain his power, he has to maintain his strength, do more work for his body to stay in shape. And the younger guys, I can do more work with them, more volume. And then over the years, I made made more changes to my programming, and I think now it's at a better point than 4 or 5 years ago. And when I then
Yeah.
came back to the juniors and had the senior hockey thought of, okay, you have a little bit more freedom, then I had to think, okay, maybe I shouldn't give them that 100% freedom, let's say, because they
Sure.
need someone who stands there and tell them, because they don't have the knowledge, the experience yet. Some guys in my team worked with their same personal trainer in the summer for 10 years, and now I don't want to change it. I just want to have a look into it. Maybe I have some different opinions or different things I want to look at. But then at the junior stage, I now want them to follow along as good as possible, because they don't have that yet. So that's where I was
Yeah.
from with that question, because it's difficult at first when you start out.
Yeah, it sounds like you have a good process though for changing this over time and refining it. And also I think what you mentioned about different like meeting different levels, like someone who's senior or who's been training for longer, they just have more time to figure out what works. Whereas someone who's very junior, likely they're open to a lot of ideas. They don't
Hmm.
really know what works or what doesn't, and they need the direction.
Yeah, and it's interesting when I'm together with the junior coaches, also on international level. They do
Mhm.
stuff a lot different than in senior hockey, and then you think again like, why are you doing that? And they're like, yeah, that's the basic work, for example, that you do every day, each and every day. And and, and in my case, when I come back to my club, why should I not integrate that? I'm always working on the fine tuning, but sometimes to just take it way easier, do the foundational work again, because you rarely do that in pro hockey or in pro sports, because you always are just fine tuning for the games. You're just maintaining between games. Why not
Yeah.
go a step back and start at the beginning? Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of coaches ask about that. And um maybe I'm not how much of a how common is it to have multiple sports from maybe the age like 14 to 18? Because in the USA, it's very common to have two or three sports. Like almost all football players also run track and field, or basketball players will also, have some sort of like sport that's off season, or basketball and football is pretty common,
Mhm.
or a soccer player, doing maybe another sport in the spring. Is
Yeah.
that common to have two sports and have a difficult time finding like off season?
When you're younger, you typically, or most of the players have two sports. I mean,
Hmm.
they don't have to in school, but for me it was tennis and ice hockey. But at a certain age, I think it was like around 14, 15, 16, after school at 4 p.m., you only have time for one sport. And if you really want to take it seriously, then you start going to the gyms a lot with the ice hockey team. You have the games on the weekends, two games. Then you have to decide, okay, or for me it was, do you want to play tennis or do you want to play ice hockey? So then I chose ice hockey, and
Hmm.
then you rarely have someone who really does two things at once. I don't know how it's with the guys here in the summer. They play golf and tennis. They go skiing, but not on as like a job or as like a
Yeah.
real sport, just like as a hobby.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
In the U.S., it's a lot of golf. Like a lot of
yeah,
pro athletes like to golf for fun because I think it's maybe more fun, fun. But yeah,
yeah.
actually, I think that the multi sport is often accomplishing some of the goals of an off-season period in a sense that like you're getting a different stimulus.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you're going from cross country to indoor track to outdoor track, it's not really accomplishing the goals because there's very specific patterns of stress with each
Yeah.
of those. And that goes down to like the bone level, like your bone adapts to that very specific pattern of stress. But like you said, if it's tennis and hockey, if it's basketball and track and field, if it's football and track, like whatever the two sports are, if they're kind of complementary, it can accomplish some of the goals of shifting training stress to different areas, and just developing a more robust base of like movement patterns and awareness and coordination.
Mm-hmm. And you also have the bonus point when you have a couple of athletes playing tennis or volleyball. They take
Mhm.
it serious too. It's not like it's just you
Yeah.
throw some balls around. They want to win, and if they lose,
Yeah.
they meet up again 2 days later for like a couple of weeks. And in the background, they're actively working out again. But for them, it's just some fun hobby in the summer. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you
Yeah.
think it should be mandatory, or it's not necessary? It should be, um, or you should have a little bit of a break after a competitive season where you just really let go of the sport you play. Not specifically hockey, also for football or soccer, that you really
Yeah.
shut off for a week or 2 or 3 and just do whatever you want, kind of.
I do think those time periods are really helpful for athletes. Yeah. I would say that's not. I hate to put requirement, but
Yeah.
I think it's very beneficial. Yeah.
Also to get with your head away from the sport and just reset mentally.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I would agree.
Matthew, I have before we wrap it up, we have one more little block of questions for you,
Sure.
and would be called rapid fire. So come some, yeah, not short, but I think questions where you can answer shortly. You can elaborate for sure. I'm very
Sure.
open to that, but just to sum it up for you.
Mhm.
First one would be a training myth that you would eliminate immediately, that you hear all the time talking about, what you know with your knowledge, it's false, and you would right away get it out of the way.
Uh, the one that I think comes up a lot is maybe that the impression that uh, aerobic or endurance training is it interferes too much with strength gain.
Mm-hmm.
I think at very high volumes it can, but actually at low to moderate volumes, up to around 45-minute sessions, for example, it can be very beneficial on recovery days, especially for athletes with an aerobic component to their sport. So just relatively low intensity, steady state training, it can increase heart rate variability, can improve essentially the volume of your heart and the amount of blood
Mm-hmm.
you can push out and the oxygen delivery. And it doesn't tend to interfere with strength until quite a bit of training volume that I think not a lot of people are reaching.
Yeah.
So, not to be afraid of that.
So don't worry that you go to the gym in the morning and go for a light run in the evening.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that for a lot of people, that would actually be beneficial for their performance.
Okay. Second one would be the most overrated trend in sports science at the moment.
I don't even know if I follow trends too much. I think one that comes to mind that was a trend for a long time was the uh, like squatting very deep or like pushing your knee over your toe. And I think that the areas where that became problematic for some athletes was whenever athletes did have like tendinopathy that was compression sensitive. This is really common in the Achilles tendon, meaning like
Mm-hmm.
whenever you go into deep dorsiflexion, the Achilles tendon presses on the kind of the back of the bone a lot, and that can be sensitive for some athletes. And we, in that case, don't go into like deep dorsiflexion. You kind of do calf raises at the top, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think for a lot of cases of patellar tendon pain, a similar strategy is really beneficial. the muscle is the strongest at the mid range. And we know that tendon responds to strain or to like the strength of like a muscle contraction. And there's kind of a threshold for like how much strain you need for the tendon to actually get stronger. And that threshold seems to be around like 70% of the maximum force that a tendon or that a muscle can create. And you can't create nearly 70% of your maximum force in deep knee flexion. So it's kind
Okay.
of it's a combination of compression, which can be sensitive, and decreased force and strain. It's just not a recipe for rehabbing tendons very well. So a lot of times I'm avoiding deep knee flexion and I'm avoiding fast rates of loading like plyometrics early, and just doing kind of slower controlled resistance through moderate ranges of motion, and a little bit more hesitant to add that stuff in. I think a lot of young athletes are ambitious and they want to get right back to those deep knee flexion, but give it time.
They always taught me that regarding squats, you either squat like a half squat or you squat femur parallel to the ground, so your knee is not at 90 degrees because of the forces that work on the knee at that point. Is that still true, or is that also already a myth?
Well, what you're talking about is like they call it like the retropatellar force, and that is maximized at like 90 degrees in a barbell squat. I don't think for most people that's a concern. Again, it's kind of like the edge cases. Like if you have a team of just for simplicity's sake 10 athletes, more likely than not 8 to 9 of them can squat any way they want. They could squat femur parallel, they could do half squats, they could squat exactly to 90 degrees where you maximize that retropatellar force, pause for 2 or 3 seconds, and then come back up and have no problems at all. It's just like that 1 or 2 athletes that's going to have some sensitivity, you might just need to adjust.
Okay. You explained it perfectly. I think I would have struggled a bit more in English with that one.
Oh, sure. Thank you.
Two more questions. One book every coach should read or should look into it to evolve and learn a little bit more about sports science.
Oh, yeah. Here, I have a couple that I keep on my desk right here, so I'll just pull them out. The one that I've been reading the most lately is this one right here. It's special strength training manual for coaches by Vert Kashansky, and I think he was one of the early pioneers, essentially like the godfather of plyometrics. You might have heard. And there's just really good like graphics and charts in here that explain a lot of time-tested principles of training. It's special strength training because some of the exercises are kind of like sport specific, but I think it's done in like a scientific way, because I think sport specific training, you can go a lot of different ways with it. Usually I say that a lot of the sport specificity comes down to the program variables, like the training volume, the intensity, the the way that you're doing the exercise to some extent, maybe reducing range of motion a little bit as you approach the season. But you don't typically need completely different exercises for each sport. I know at the college strength and conditioning level, a lacrosse program had a lot of similarity to a field hockey program, to a basketball program, especially in the off season whenever you're building general strength. But I think like done well, learning some methods of sport specificity that have been time tested and make sense can be really beneficial.
Okay. One last question, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Is there or was there any impact or any challenge or concept what happened to you that you changed your career into moving towards those topics you now work on at the moment, also with your podcast and with your YouTube channel?
Yeah. Well, I will say, like, personally, what I compete in now is mostly endurance sports. So I still like to play basketball. I played like 5 games of basketball before we got on this podcast. I still love playing basketball. I usually play once a week, and then I play soccer on the weekends, most weekends. So I love, sport and playing sport, but my specialty in terms of my own like actual competition, like where I get the most competitive, is usually a few races a year, and they're endurance based, anywhere from 5K to 10K races up to like Ironman distance triathlon racing, and that's who I tend to enjoy coaching the most, and that's because I think from the strength and conditioning side, they're often underserved, um, because either they meet a strength and conditioning coach who's like, you know, runners need to lift, they just need to lift a lot, and then they give them heavy back squats and RDLs and lunges, but they kind of give them too much all at once, and either the runner is kind of they feel the impact on their running, their times go down, and some of this can be temporary, but they struggle to adapt to like a heavy resistance training program. That's pretty common for runners, and then they like struggle to maintain resistance training, even though it's really beneficial for running economy, injury reduction, and just longevity in the sport of running. But I think over time, just solving my own injuries with running, working with really great mentors who worked with runners, and learning a lot of like performance tests and physiological tests and movement assessments to work with runners. You know, I've been able to gain a good knowledge in that area, and just like understand the training that works well for runners. And from a strength and conditioning standpoint, that's a lot of like single leg work through relatively short range of motion, like heavy small step ups. I like marches, and some different drills that involve the core. I think like you know, I've done some really good endurance work that involves like going between like a plank and a push up for 2 to 3 minute sets, and that tends to be pretty beneficial for some of my endurance athletes to kind of get all their core work in just like one hard set of 3 minutes of this like kind of functional core movement. So I think just overall, like getting to the point where I can give like a good 20-minute strength session to runners that does well for their lateral hip, their trunk, and their the important areas for them without like crushing them so they miss their times on their interval session, you know, a day or two later.
Yeah. You have your podcast, Matthew. You have your YouTube. It's called The Movement System. So please, to everyone who's listening, have a look into Matthew's work. I stumbled upon it. I told you before we started the episode, I really enjoyed the things you put out there. And I'm really glad that someone is doing that and be consistent with that and sharing information and insights. That's also what I'm trying to do. Where can people find also more about you except from YouTube or Spotify?
Yeah, if you just search The Movement System kind of on any of the major platforms where people put stuff, you'll kind of find some of our videos. And yeah, like I said, I've been doing that for over 5 years now, just trying to put out 1 or 2 videos a week on just what I'm thinking about, what I'm reading about, what problems that I run into with any of the programs that I'm writing or the consults that I'm doing with athletes. And you know, just I think over time I've gotten a little bit better at trying to communicate that. So yeah, hopefully that's beneficial for you. If you want to check that out, just search The Movement System and you'll find it.
Perfect. Matthew, it was a pleasure talking to you. I really enjoyed our talk, our conversation. And before I forget it, you showed your book for a second. So anyone who's listening, since a couple of weeks, this podcast is also on YouTube with video. So whoever is interested in seeing that book, head over to YouTube and check it out. And on my side, like I just mentioned, thank you so much. It was a pleasure. And I hope we will follow up on that conversation in the future, maybe.
Yeah, I hope they stay in contact. It was a great conversation, and credit to you for being able to do this in English, not your primary language. It's very impressive.
Like you just said, just wanting to get a little bit better day by day.
I love it.
Matthew, thank you so much and take care.
Yeah, take care.
Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to the show. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to follow the podcast, leave a rating or comment, and share it with someone who loves sports science. And for more content, follow me on Instagram at science_in_sports_. See you in the next episode.